Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for the Week 6 edition of Inside the Zone. Justin Kinney of Optimum Performance Sports. And as we always talk fractions here, we are, I believe, two-thirds.
Two-thirds of the way
using
through.
the common denominators, two-thirds of the way through the regular season, which is crazy after this coming Friday. So after Week 5, I felt like Week 4 and Week 5 gave us some clarity, but also mixed things up at the same. That doesn't even make sense. But some clarity on what teams were, and also mix things up in the conference standings at the same time. What do we know at this point, heading towards the rest of the season, where now a lot of teams are either eyeing a conference championship or getting things ready for a postseason run?
Well, I think when we look at the top of the conferences, you look at the SAC. Carroll has a 2+ game lead on everybody else at this point. You look at Norwell, who they do have some games coming up that could be challenges, but they're the clear favorite in the NE8. And same thing with Adams Central. Despite getting South Adams this week, and we hope for a close game, the Flying Jets are far and above, at least on paper, everybody else in that league. So I think through 5 weeks, we can say these 3 teams across those 3 leagues are the cream of the crop, and it goes Carroll, Norwell, and Adams Central.
I want to talk about that South Adams Central game because that is going to be our highlight zone game of the week. It's Week 6 every year, and it goes in waves. A few years ago, It was South Adams. Now Adams Central. Adams Central with a couple of big wins last year against South Adams, 48-7 in the regular season, 41-0 at regionals in the postseason. How can South Adams make this a game, and what's really going to be the key on Friday night down in Bern for the Starfires and Coach Mosier?
Well, it's a high-flying offense for the South Adams Starfires, not as much as previous years, but it still likes to pick up yardage in chunks. And I think for South Adams to hang around in this for 4 quarters, they can't get behind early. We see what Adams Central's been able to do time and again throughout the season is get up early on teams, and then coast is the wrong word, but get that comfort zone, and then stretch the lead and get a big victory. So for South Adams, they got to come out quick. They need to stay in this game through the first half of the game and then be there in the second half to make some plays. And for South Adams, and talking to Coach Grant Mosier, his team has kind of let up in the second half of some games, particularly the fourth quarter, and maybe made games a little bit closer than they should. So for South Adams to have a shot in this one, start quick and play a complete 4 quarters to try to have a shot with the Flying Jets.
Certainly no lack of motivation this week if you're South Adams. We rattled off the scores last year for South Adams, and then also falling to Heritage a couple of weeks ago has to raise the hackles, if you will, for South Adams. So I know Coach Mosier down in Bern is going to be not going to have to work real hard this week to get these guys motivated. For Adams Central, how do you make sure that they don't, 14 to 18-year-old young men, how do you make sure that they don't come in overconfident in a game like this?
I think that's the great balance for Coach Michael Mosier all season with this team is the way that they're able to dominate opponents week after week. And it is a team that has had some challenges, and you looked at that Eastside game in particular that they were they were tested, is focusing on getting better every single week and maybe not necessarily worrying about the scoreboard. You want the wins, but they have goals that are much greater than an ACAC championship. And for them to reach those goals, and we look at the landscape of Class 1A and say they're probably the best team in the North. You could make a case that they're the best team in the entire state outside of Indianapolis Lutheran, and maybe they're neck and neck. Continue to get better each and every week and get primed because, and this goes for everybody, you're running out of opportunities in the regular season to get better and be ready to play your best football starting in Week 10.
Yeah, it's tough to find times to really test yourself with only a few weeks left to play in the regular season. And we ask this question all the time. Geographically, man, you look at this matchup, they're like 8 miles apart. Both of these teams, when the AP poll comes out tomorrow, expected to be in the top 5 when it comes to 1A football. And yet, around them, Southern Wells has struggled. North of them in the same county, Belmont is really struggling right now. South of them, Jay County, even though they're a bigger school, has struggled. So how is it possible that there's this much concentrated football talent for 2 1A football programs when a lot of the teams nearby have been struggling?
I think we talk about this a lot in the SAC with continuity, with coaching, right? And we see it at Adams Central and South Adams with the coaches, with the Mosiers there, and even in previous regimes as well at those 2 programs. It's continuity, the expectations from one year to the next, and that builds, and that means something. When you look at Southern Wells, a lot of coaches in a limited amount of time. Same with Belmont. You look at Jay County, and they've struggled with getting any continuity as well. But it's like the bastions of Wells County or Adams County, excuse me. It's two teams, two programs with high expectations year after year after year, and over time that builds and becomes an expectation. And when you look at those two programs, that's kind of what they hang their hat on is every year we're going to have this type of team. And, at AC, it's going to be run heavy. At South Adams, you're going to come out and spread it out and try to take advantage of matchups. And it's just kind of their identity over the better part of a decade. It becomes that culture thing where the expectation is there. In the middle of nowhere, in Monroe, Indiana, Bern, Indiana, you have two powerful 1A programs.
And I hate to be like cliche or overly cheesy, but like this is what the atmosphere on Friday and the friendships between people on the sidelines for both teams. This is really what kind of high school sports are all about. What high school football is all about. Like it really showcases the small town community and all that stuff that people say, oh, that's overly cheesy. It really is, man. You go down to some of that, like it's really cool to see the way that these two communities support this program and to see both of them, cheer each other on in the postseason if they're eliminated. This is all the good stuff.
Yeah, it's all
of high
good
school
feels
football.
all around, right? With this showdown.
All the feels, as the kids say. Let's talk about the SAC because, as you mentioned earlier, Carroll has really tightened its grip on the championship as we look forward to 4 more games. They've got Southside this week, they've got Homestead next week, and Concordia and Wayne to round things out. But like you said, it's like a 2-game lead when you talk about head-to-head in the SAC standings. When
you look at on paper, you say, okay, well, only one team can match up with them, and that's Homestead. And then what we saw out of Snyder and Homestead last week, you kind of question that. I would give all the money in the world to see Snyder and Carroll play again.
I would love to see that.
Right? We're not going to see it. They're in different classes. But Snyder's been the only team, in my opinion, that's been able to challenge Carroll. Northside for a little bit, but by and large, Carroll just continues to get better and better and better. That defense is so difficult to score against, and it just takes everything out of a team to move the ball down the field and put points on the board against Carroll. Braden Steely is phenomenal, and on defense, now we're seeing him on offense, and that's a complete football team at Carroll, and it's very difficult for other squads when you look at Dwenger, where you look at Homestead, where you look at Northside, very difficult for those teams to match up. Snyder's the only one that I felt had a shot to knock off Carroll, and that was with a shorthanded team with Snyder, missing Langston Level, missing KJ Eldridge. So go back to the original point. Would love to see them two play again, but unfortunately we won't see it.
The Carroll team this year reminds me a bit of the back-to-back Homestead teams we saw a couple years ago where everybody, coming in new, Homestead's program could score a lot of points, and they wanted to see a tougher defense.
Yeah.
Well, Carroll's got it. They had Jake Archbold, they had Cam Rogers back in the day, a slew of guys did Homestead. Now Carroll's got the dudes on the defensive side of the football that hit hard, that you don't really want to play against, and that really make plays specifically in the defensive backfield. I mean, with a defense like that, it's tough. It's tough not to see them winning the SAC and not winning out as far as this goes.
I think it's a great point because I think we've seen it with Carroll and Homestead in their development in the SAC is they were always that finesse team and they could put up a lot of points, but they also gave up a lot of points. And to be successful in the SAC, your defense has to be full of dogs. And I think for Homestead and Carroll, those kids needed to find a fundamental shift in toughness and physicality that maybe they didn't need in the old Northeast Hoosier Conference. And I feel like we're seeing that with Carroll and Homestead over the last several years is those kids are tough. Carroll, that defense is tough, and I don't think you could say that with the personnel they sometimes had maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, those are as tough dudes as you're going to find in the SAC, and that hasn't always been the case with those programs in Carroll and Homestead. So it's a testament to those dudes, particularly at Carroll this year. Valdez and Steely and Bennett and all those guys, Pasetsky. I mean, you could look at that roster, that defensive unit, and say there's 5 or 6 easy first-team All-SAC picks starting on that defense. It's that good.
And going forward, Snyder obviously wants to stay in the SAC championship race just in case, Carroll does slip up perhaps to Homestead next week. But when you look at Snyder, this is a team now that also has to start focusing on the postseason.
Sure.
You're probably, if things play out, you're going to see Dwenger perhaps at some time in sectionals when you're talking about 5A. So if you're Snyder, coming off a really impressive a dominant performance last week against Homestead, going forward, like what do you need to see from them to feel really confident about making a long postseason run?
Well, I think it's going to be continuing dominance in the trenches. You're looking at that sectional, and you're looking at Northside, Dwenger, and Snyder that are all top 10 teams in Class 5A, at least in the polls, right? So it's going to be a very challenging sectional between those teams, and it's whichever team is peaking at the right time. Every coach talks about it, right? We need to play our best football week 10 and beyond, and that's going to be the goal over the final 4 weeks of the season when we look at Snyder, Northside, and Dwenger in particular, is which of those three teams can peak at the right time, and that's going to make a big difference in that 2-week stretch deciding that 5A sectional.
And you mentioned Northside this week. They're at Homestead. That's probably the most intriguing game in the SAC this week. How do you see that one playing out? Because we talk a lot about Tay Johnson, and he's banged up with the shoulder. But Jonte Lambert, in my opinion, hasn't gotten as much love as he should have. Because we take a look at running backs, and it starts in the SAC with Lamarion Nelson.
Yeah.
But Jonte Lambert, when you look at the overall total numbers, is right up there with him, despite the fact that Mr. Nelson had over 400 yards last week. I mean, Lambert has been, I guess, underappreciated, I think, throughout the SAC this year.
Well, I think, he plays second fiddle to Marion Nelson in terms of the running back position in the SAC, and he plays second fiddle on his own roster to Bronte Johnson. And, for good measure, because Tay-Tay's a tremendous football player. But, the difference between Northside of this year and previous years that we felt like they could be a contender in the league is they're able to run the football. I think, too often in recent memory, Northside really relied on that big play offensively because they couldn't move the ball consistently, going first down to first down and first down and moving the ball down the field, right? So with Jonte Lambert and that offensive front that I don't think we give enough credit to is they're able to truly be a diversified offense and really be a run and pass threat offense. And that changes everything because you can't have guys stack the box or play that passive. You have to respect the run. And Northside's been able to move the ball with that. A lot of that goes through Jonte Lambert. He's been tremendous. And when you look at the matchup this week with Homestead, can that run game continue to grind out yardage against Homestead? Because the Spartans will put in a good defensive front. They're solid in that front seven. You could say it's maybe the biggest test for Northside between now and the start of the postseason. So if they can go on the road and get a dub over a quality opponent and really end that gauntlet of a 6-week schedule to start the year with a win, then it bodes well for Northside as they try to finish with their first winning season in over 10 years, close to 10 years, and really get some momentum for that very difficult sectional.
And I love Jordan King on that offensive line for Northside. People don't realize how good of a prospect he is. He can move really well. You see him on the basketball court. He's got good footwork. He's got athleticism. I think he's a guy to watch. If you already don't know the name, make sure you know it by the end of this season. Let's talk about the Northeast State now. Norwell, I don't want to say it's a statement win, but my God, was it impressive last week. When you look at the way they handled a New Haven team that just a few weeks ago we were talking like, maybe this is the team that'll challenge them the most. We turned out to be way wrong on that, at least score-wise. I think New Haven, if they played them again, I don't know that it would be that big of a gap, but Norwell was impressive in every phase of the game. Norwell at East Noble this week. How do you see this one playing out for an East Noble team that was in another instant classic last week against Leo and came out on the losing side 28-21?
It's still a growing East Noble team. You have so many young guys in key positions for that team, and you're looking towards 23 and 24 as maybe the team's opportunity to win the Northeast 8. Anything can happen, of course, on any given Friday night, but Norwell is so good. It's so loaded with so many good players. When you looked at last week against New Haven and their defense scores 30 points. They have, 3 pick sixes? They have a fumble for a touchdown. They have a safety. I mean, the defense put up 30 points. It put up more than the offense did. So it was a reminder to anybody who even gave it a second thought of who runs this league, this year, and it's Norwell. And it's really their final test, I feel, this season. You have Columbia City looming as well, but, man, going on the road, never easy place to play in Kendallville. But, man, it's really difficult to look at this Norwell team and give anyone a shot in the league based on how they're playing.
Norwell for the rest of the season. East Noble this week, DeKalb the week after that, Huntington North, and then closing out with Columbia City. Columbia City's got New Haven this week. I don't want to give them the New Haven treatment where we say, hey, this is the team that has the best chance.
But mark of death, right?
But as good as Norwell looked in the first half last week, that's how good DeKalb looked. Columbia City looked against DeKalb 42-0 in the early going, eventually winning that one handily. So Columbia City's, we've always talked about how their schedule's backloaded.
Yeah.
It really starts this week with New Haven and Milan Graham, then East Noble, then Leo, then Norwell. I mean, boy, you really lined it up for a heck of a finish. But again, you're talking about a team that at this point might be the one that challenges Norwell the most.
You know, at the very least, Columbia City could be the second best team in this league. And we're going to find out over the next couple weeks, right, with this backloaded schedule. And so much was made about losing Greg Bolt to graduation, a phenomenal football player, multi-year starter. But I think we need to give credit to Colton Piper in coming in that position. And, you know, he doesn't need to be dynamic. He doesn't need to be Greg Bolt. He just needs to be Colton Piper. And he's done a tremendous job playing within himself and leading that offense and protecting the football, making plays when he needs to. He's got talented receivers. He has talented running backs. And the last 2 weeks in particular, I know people are going to say, well, it was wins over Huntington North and DeKalb. But we looked at both games as maybe considered to be closer than we thought.
Yeah.
And they destroy Huntington North and they destroy DeKalb over the last 2 weeks. So, you know, could this Columbia City team in years past, these last 4 games are a gauntlet for them? You know, could we see a team that can go 2-2, maybe even 3-1, and potentially challenge Norwell in Week 9? You got to like what Columbia City's done through the first half of the year, but now is really when we find out how good that team is.
And when you talk about Piper, he utilizes the guys around him very well and runs the offense. When you hear people say, well, he manages the game very well, that almost seems like a knock.
I know, right?
Yeah. But it's like he gets the ball to guys in space. He gets the balls to guys in space. They make plays. The offense runs efficiently.
Right.
There's a lot to be said for a high school quarterback doing that.
Yeah. He's one of those guys that on Friday nights, you're not often going, wow, did you see the night that Colton Piper had? But the way that Columbia City is winning and that offense is humming along is you have to give a kid like that credit. You know, I think he only has 1 interception still on the season. I mean, protecting the football is huge at any level of football, particularly high school on Friday nights. And, you know, a senior leader that has kind of, you know, waited his turn.
Had to bide his time.
Yeah, right. And ascends to, you know, everybody's first point with Columbia City to start the year was, you don't have Greg Bolt. But Colton Piper, I wouldn't say he's helped them forget Greg Bolt, but he's helped them soften that blow of losing him.
When you talk about the NECC, you got Fairfield at Angola this week. That's the one to schedule, or that's the one to circle on the schedule. Central Noble's playing well. They've had a couple of back-to-back shutouts, but I want to go to this Fairfield-Angola game because when it comes to West Noble, Fairfield, and Angola, those 3 teams are the teams, you know, in the larger division.
Sure.
And it seems like we can get different performances from those 3 teams every week. Like some version of those 3 teams is going to win the championship. But how's it going to shake out? And this game's going to go a long way in determining that after Fairfield got really drubbed.
They did
by West Noble.
Yeah. I think Angola's in the key position here. If they can get a win on Friday, you have to like their chances in the big division to wrap this thing up. And I felt like, you know, we looked at Fairfield and we gave them a lot of credit for their 4-0 start. But maybe that first 4 wins lacked in terms of substance, in terms of quality of opponent. I know they beat Southport, but you could argue that's one of the worst 5A and 6A teams in the entire state, and maybe they were too high off that win in Week 4 because West Noble came and owned them, and Seth Pruitt with 3 touchdowns, and Drew Yates has been very, very good for them in the quarterback position. You know, this is a big game for both teams. West Noble needs this one to have a shot in the big division, and Angola's looking at this as an opportunity to really be in the catbird seat in the league with 3 weeks left to go.
What are you looking forward to most this coming Friday? As you said, after this week, only 3 weeks to go.
I think the NECC takes center stage for the next couple weeks. You know, the big division, there's some big games coming up with this Friday. Next week, you know, the small division kind of takes center stage and trying to decide that. So when we look at those dominant teams in the SAC, ACAC, and NE8, maybe it takes some excitement out of the conference championship race. But the NECC, we still have a lot to decide.
All right. We'll decide it on the Highlight Zone Friday night here on Wayne TV. And then, of course, we'll be back on Monday for Inside the Zone with Justin Kinney. For Justin, I'm Glenn. We'll see you next Monday.